Hi everyone, Megan here from Romance by the Book with the lovely Marielle.
Hello.
And this is May, friends, and we are reading Bride by Ali Hazelwood. We're very excited.
Yes, it's so much fun. If you were with us last month, there was some very nuanced sniffing, and I feel like we have carried that on into this month, but it's a
Yes,
completely
absolutely.
different, not
The last book was wolf
historical, but
vibes. This is actual wolf.
we got a wolf and a vampire. She also smells interesting things like heartbeats and
Yeah, that was
it's
really
very
cool how
interesting.
that was described for sure. So we're doing the first ten chapters today. So we start with a prologue, and Misery is a great heroine name, P.S. Like chef's
Yeah.
kiss to that. She's getting ready for her wedding to the Alpha Were. She has never met him. It's supposed to be like a step toward like vampire were relations, which have been basically at war for centuries. Her twin brother Owen and is like their dad's heir, and she's always just been kind of like superfluous in her own family until they need her for something. um
Which happens every once in a while. Just
yeah, and but what they ask is a big fucking ask every time too, so it's a lot. So Owen is with her like walking down to the area, and he's like cracking jokes about the wares, and he reminds her of the last time a vampire and a were tried to get married for peace, and it was a thing they everyone in the world knows about, called the Astor massacre basically.
yeah.
And everybody died. It was terrible. But then he gets kind of serious and he tries to talk her out of it, which surprises her because he is her dad's heir. He always acts very like laissez-faire about everything, and she's like, "Why do you care?" Basically, like they haven't
Yeah.
really had a lot of contact in a while.
No, and he does it like you get the idea that he's kind of like millionaire playboy, like whatever the vampiric version of that is.
Yeah.
So doesn't really like doesn't take anything seriously, is just like, you know, doing his thing until he inherits. And so yeah, he it's very kind of out of character.
Yeah. So vampires in this world have like pointy ears, almost elf-like, and then like lilac eyes. Um, so her father shows up to walk her down the aisle. She's trying to think about the last time they actually touched, and she can't
Never.
remember when it was. Yeah. There's clearly no love lost between them. And at the altar, her groom finally turns to look at her, and he looks shook. And she's like, "Oh God, he hates my guts." Like I kind of knew he hated my guts, like generally because I'm a
Just
vampire,
yeah.
but like clearly he really hates my guts. This is not good for me.
Hmm.
She definitely thinks it's contempt, and it is not so much. Which as the reader you kind of figure out pretty early. Um, he is shocked at how she smells. He says something like, "How can you smell like this?" or "How can you smell this good?" or something. I can't remember. And
Yeah.
she's
I don't know
like,
if he says good because she
"Yeah, no,
immediately
yeah."
thinks that
He's like, "How
he
can you
smells
smell
bad.
like this?" I think is what he says. And so they get married. So then we flash back to 6 weeks earlier, and Misery is like living in the human world. She's working nights at a human job. She's stuck with this annoying coworker jabbering her in her ear. And her father's head of security shows up. She hasn't seen her or any vampires really in years.
Yeah.
And she's like, "Oh no."
So it's she's like a very talented computer coder,
Mhm.
and she has part of what her job is that she tests like the firewalls and the
Right.
security systems for companies. So currently at her job, somebody had worked for months and weeks and who knows how long to create this impenetrable system, and she in 1 hour was like, oh, I'm in. And so
So
there
they
is
hate her
some
guts.
tension there. um
Really tension.
but not nearly so much as when this scary vampire woman
Yeah.
shows up.
And
Everybody
she's basically just like,
stampedes out
"You've
of
been
there.
summoned." And she's like, "To where?" And she's like, "The Nest," which I guess is like the main hub where her dad and the vampire council or whatever like runs their
Yeah.
business.
It does make it sound like wasps, but
Yes.
she's like to the nest, and there is like a stampede of like every coworker, everyone who's in that office is out,
Yeah, they're like,
and
"Vampires!" And they're like running. It's a
they're
whole
like,
thing.
we're under attack, and
And
then
she says, I liked this job. She says Vanya is the woman's name. I liked this job. Sorry, she says, and her face is like, not sorry.
Not sorry. Yeah. It's like
um,
she's definitely never coming back here.
no, she can never come back. She literally took the only thing on her desk, which was like a photo of her and her best friend, and they left because she knew she couldn't come back. Um, so being summoned this way is basically unprecedented. Like her father has never asked her to come back since she left at 18. Like done. Uh,
Yeah.
so she doesn't know what to expect, but she knows it's probably not going to be good. So when they're heading there, she's thinking about her human best friend Serena, and she brought her there once because she wanted to see it. And and so she's like thinking about that, like while they're going up the elevator or whatever. And you don't know much about her friend yet, but you're gonna learn more here pretty quick. Um,
Mhm.
so Misery's dad shows up. He kind of tries small talk, but of course she's not buying it. She's like, "What do you want? Like, why am I here?" And she sets out her phone timer. She's like, "You have 10 minutes." Like, and then
Yeah, he's definitely like a kind of like the consummate politician is how
yeah,
he is described. And so he's having this like kind of schmoozy conversation with her, and she's just like, this,
that's not why I'm here.
no.
Yeah, it's a pretty boss move. She literally times, she's like, "Okay, you have 10 minutes, and then I'm leaving." So he tells her that the humans have elected a new governor who will not meet with him at all and has announced the end of the collateral program, which is basically like a hostage exchange program where a vampire kid and a human kid who are both important to somebody important swap places for 10 years. And the person who did it last before the current one was Misery. When she was a kid, she was the vampire collateral for a decade.
It's a really like terrible, it's
Terrible.
terrible system. Like it's collateral. It makes you think of collateral damage too, which feels like they're saying that that person's
Yeah.
not important, even though their whole, so the whole thing is this person, they swap. The way that vampires and humans maintain relations is that vampires and humans swap a person who is like important to someone of importance, and their whole purpose for being in like enemy territory basically is that if something goes awry, they will be killed. Like
They're the
it's,
first ones. Yeah.
they're gonna get killed. They're there as like a threat
Yeah.
to the other side.
Exactly.
And so like the entire time that you are serving as collateral
Yeah.
is basically like you've got like a knife to your throat.
All like
Uh
for 10 years.
the
And you're a
entire time.
kid for most of it, like a little kid. I think she was 8 when she went
Yeah.
until 18. She basically grew up with humans. She doesn't know a lot about vampire customs and stuff because she wasn't there to learn them. And on top of that, the vampires all hated her. Like it was her choice to go live with humans, which of course it wasn't. It's a very messed up situation. And that's part of the
Yeah.
reason why she was living in the human world now. Because at 18, she returned to vampire world. Everybody treated her like shit. And she's like, what am I doing? Like, this is crazy. And she left
Right.
again.
And her dad, it's not as if, I don't know. It feels to me as a person from the outside who is outraged, that her dad could have helped her like become more educated,
Yes.
but it was not like that. Like her dad really did treat her like she was just like whatever,
Yeah.
dumped you over there. He decided that his son was going to be the heir, and we do
Mhm.
kind of get the like she's older, so she
Right.
could have, should
They're
have been, but
twins
he
technically,
just,
but yeah, she's older.
but
Um,
yeah, so it's like but he decided that it was going to be the son
yeah.
and basically kind of threw her away, which sucks.
Yeah, it really does. And so he tells her that the human governor-elect has been meeting with the Weres and they're about to form an alliance, and the vampires can't let themselves be excluded from this because they're already outnumbered in pretty much every way. And like if this happens, they could end up extinct.
Also, we're
Um,
told that like vampires have fertility issues. Like there's just
right.
not very many vampires born, and
And so
therefore,
monogamy is like not a thing anymore because they need to try to propagate their species.
well, and also just because they're not producing more vampires, their like focus is on like the preservation of the many, and that's a thing that like her dad kind of throws in her face at every interaction, but we immediately see it in this one where it's like, no, whatever decision you like, every decision I made, it doesn't matter if it hurt you because it
Right.
was
They're
for the
not
good of
important.
everybody.
Yeah.
And even though he acts like that's how he governs all his decisions, you do kind of get the feeling like this guy is like a narcissist,
Oh
and
God.
his, I'm sure that he is fine in all of
Like,
these,
it's
like
good for him and the mini. Never something that's good for the mini, but not good for him, for
yeah.
sure. And so he talks about how a vampire is going to marry the new alpha were, and guess who that's going to be? So she literally laughs and she calls her dad unhinged. And he basically talks some shit about how the vampires are always, yeah, like you said, doing what's best for the mini, which is what's led to the situation they're in now. And he's
Well,
like,
she's like, I
it's a
already
paid
did my
job.
part. She's like,
Oh
I
yeah,
already did
she's more than done her
for
part.
the many.
And
So
he's like, he says it's a paid job. You'll be compensated. And she's like, unless it's $10 billion, no. And he's like, no,
also
it's not $10 billion.
she's also very smart because she is like, I know I'm not your first choice.
Yeah,
So compel one of those other
right.
people.
Find
And
somebody else.
she's not the first, she's not the third. She's
No,
like, she is down the list and she's not going to do it.
no,
And
she's not.
she's like she's watching that timer
Oh yeah, she's watching it. And
because
he's going through all the things. Like, it's not $10 billion, but you will be financially set for life. Marriage in name only for 1 year. She's like, still no. And so she goes to leave, but then her dad says the alpha's name, Lowe Moreland. And she says, oh, I guess I'm getting married. And you're like, wait, what?
yeah. I mean, she has like her hand on the door and her dad
Yeah.
was like, I still have time. And the thing goes off at that exact moment. So
Uh-huh.
she's like out
Yeah.
until she hears that name. So
And
now
she's
we're
like, I guess
like,
I'm getting
what?
married. And you're like, what in the world? So then we go back to present day. Misery is on a balcony, kind of looking over the wedding reception, stuck talking to the outgoing governor, who was like a patsy of her dad's, basically,
Yeah.
who is tying one on in a big way and starts just like telling things. He tells her that the alpha's mate is who is being sent for the Were collateral in this whole marriage situation that she's just done. Um, and she's shocked by that.
Yeah.
And
It's
she's like, no wonder
interesting
he
that
hates
she's
me.
like she's believing what he's saying kind of at face value, which
Yeah,
I guess is fair since
yeah,
he was like a governor, so he should know things.
right,
However, like we already in earlier chapters have seen that like humans, like the things that people that between the species, the things that they like think they know about each other,
right,
a lot of it's like lore. It's not a
right.
thing.
It's all BS. Yeah. So she's like, no wonder he hates me. Like, he had to give up his mate for this, like this, and he had to marry me. Like, this is the worst. So she's coming down the stairs and she sees her husband at the bottom of the stairs with two other wares. And one of them says to him something like, you must be confused. She can't be your, and then the music starts playing and she can't hear the rest of what they're saying. And a fight almost breaks out in the crowd because there's wares and vampires there and they don't usually commingle, as we've discussed.
Yeah.
And
And it's like a kid's situation. Yeah.
he sends them off to kind of deal with that. And he's like, I know you're there, Miss Lark, he says. And so she comes down the stairs and he's like, they're waiting for us to do our first dance. And so they start dancing. And she says, so I smell like sewers or something? And he says, or something. And then he says, does your father hate you? And she's like, and a lot to unpack there, clearly. But she's like, yeah, he's like, I need to know the situation. Like, does he, because if he doesn't really care about you, this doesn't work. You know what I mean? Like, if he doesn't care
Uh-huh.
what happens to you, then this doesn't work. Um, and so as they're dancing, she's thinking about her best friend Serena, which it's starting to become more clear that something has happened to her. You don't know what's going on, but like something's
She's
wrong.
not around. It's not like she's her bridesmaid. So
Right. And so then you find out that's why she agreed to this marriage. She has a plan to find Serena. But again, you don't know a lot of details about that at this point. Um, so as they're dancing, some waiter comes over and tries to kill her, and Lowe stops him, and he gets stabbed in the arm for his trouble. Um, and and of course he's read her file. They sort of joke about that, and he knows that she's had many assassination attempts against her from the time she was a child as
yeah,
collateral. And he's like, okay, let's just stay out of each other's way for the next year. And she says, and they say romance is dead.
they do have very good
Yeah.
banter
And
at the
then he
beginning.
kind of like breathes her in, it seems like, and then he walks away. And she's like, doesn't know what to make of that.
She's like, that's weird.
Yeah. And so Misery is woken up in the middle of the day by a little voice saying, "This used to be my room. Can I hide in here?" And she's like, "What is happening? This is like torture."
Yeah.
It's like the middle of the day. So, and you kind of learn more about vampires. Like they don't have to sleep during the day, but like they do get really lethargic and tired if they don't. And like they can go in the sun, but it does burn them, but they don't like burst into flames or anything. So it's all just kind of like variations on, what you would expect. Uh,
Yeah, and the way it's described is it's just like kind of genetic variances from humans.
right.
So
Like she's
they're not
nocturnal,
that different from
like an owl.
the yeah. Yeah. But it is interesting that that little girl, I mean, I guess it's I feel like any parent who's had their kid like curl in the bed with them at 2 in the morning
It's like,
and just
what's
started
happening?
talking, or they wake up with like a child staring at them.
Staring at them. Oh yeah, it's happened. It's very weird and
Yep.
crazy when you first wake up.
Yeah.
And she does notice that the little girl's eyes look like Lowe's, and she's like, "That's weird." And then another were, Juno, finds them and sends Anna, which is the little girl's name, downstairs. And
It's
she's
interesting because she's so very protective. She's like, get away from her. And
right.
you're poor Mystery is like, I am not even awake. Like, I don't understand. She's
Yeah,
like, I
she's like,
locked
"Stay
the
away from
door.
her." She's like,
And she
"She
asked the
literally
girl
came
because
in
she
here.
yeah, she was like, I was asleep. And she's like, I
I was
locked
dead
the
out."
door. She before the like babysitter comes, she is asking this little girl. She's so cute, but she's kind of like, I locked this door. Like, how are you? And she was like, oh well, I have a key because it
Right.
used to be my room.
Yeah.
And there's a cat. And so she's also like,
It's Serena's cat, her friend's cat. She calls it the damn fucking cat. It doesn't have a
and the
name.
cat has no name.
She's only
So
I think she said she only had it for like 3 days before she disappeared or something, so they never named it.
yeah. So this child has like already, I don't know. I feel like it was like a torture what's a kid interrogation, who got
Mhm.
information out of Misery and then got sent away. Um and yeah, the lady who had come in there is so like,
So
don't you
abrasive.
be touching people and
Yeah.
don't you, and she's
Yeah,
like,
she's like, "You shouldn't walk around unsupervised, you shouldn't ask questions about the pack," and she's like, "That's a lot of rules for an adult." And then she finds out that Anna is Lowe's sister. Um, and so, after this whole interaction with the other were, she's thinking about Serena because of the cat,
mhm,
and the fact she got it from the shelter 3 days before she vanished. They used to live together, but now they each live alone, and Serena didn't show up for laundry night, and she's missed work, and no one has heard from her, and so she's officially missing. Misery went to the human police, who did jack all, and tried to convince her that Serena just, like, ran off and didn't tell her, it was a whole thing. So Misery, of course, is basically a hacker. So she looked everywhere she could and found nothing, which is
yeah.
weird enough. And
And
then
her friend is some kind of like journalist, like she
right.
investigates like financial something or others.
Mhm.
So she did look and see if she was like working on a story or if somehow got into
Right.
something that was dangerous, but she has not found anything that was useful.
Right. And so she went to Serena's apartment and she was feeding the cat, and she finds the cat playing with this piece of paper, which is from a plan, like ripped out from a planner, and it has something written in a code that they used to use as kids. And
Yep.
it said L.E. Moreland, which is why it's her only lead. So when she heard his name, she was like, "Oh, I'm gonna go there. Like, this is the best way for me to potentially
Yeah.
find information about Serena." Um, and so later, this were named Alex shows her around the house, and she finds out that one of Lowe's seconds, Gabrielle, is the one she thinks she's the one who was sent to live with the vampires. So that's the one she assumes is his mate. He has 11 other seconds. I guess there's different like family or neighborhood type groups geographically, and there's like
Mhm.
12 of them or whatever. And so there's like one from each group that serve as his like council or whatever kind of.
Yeah.
Um, and Alex
The
basically says
vampires have a council and it's like it's
inherited.
hereditary. But the wolves, it works a bit differently. So
Yeah. And he
um
basically tells her she can go around the house wherever she wants, but like stay out of Lowe's office and like his room and Anna's room. And she's like, sure, sure, sure.
okey-dokey. Where
Um,
is it? Where is it again?
yeah, which
Just
one is his
just in
office?
case.
Yeah.
And she
So
does
later on,
drop a
she
line about herself, like, about how she might get lost because she has a terrible
Mm,
sense of direction,
right.
and this is, like, intentionally,
Yes,
like, she's
absolutely.
dropping that there.
And so later on, she's kind of wandering around the house and she's cornered by a young were named Max. He goes on about vampires being the enemy and like killing his family, and then he attacks her. She fights him off and she has him like up against the wall and is like showing him her fangs when Lowe comes and like plucks her off of him. And
Mhm.
then Max starts crying some sob story about how Misery tried to kill him. And
Yeah.
she literally laughs because it's so ridiculous. And
Mhm.
so Lowe takes her into his office and asks what happened. And then Juno, the babysitter lady, comes in accusing her of being a liar. And Lowe is like, no, get out. Like, I need to figure this out. And so,
The thing that's interesting is that when he does ask her, she says things,
yeah,
and people are like, "How did you know that? She must be a
right.
spy." But Lo is obviously like, "Wait a minute.
He
Okay,
knows
so
he means. Yeah,
exactly what did he say? Because she is saying things that don't mean anything to her, but that mean
right.
something to them."
Right. That she would have no way of even knowing about if not from this whole interaction. So they talk and then they kind of banter a little bit. And through this conversation, we find out that she's a virgin. I forget how they like, he said something like, or she said something about it not being a real marriage. And he's like, it's not like anybody expects you to be a virgin. And she's like, great, I love surprising people or something like that. And he's like, he kind of like freezes. And apparently that's super weird for vampires because, like we said, they're kind of like floating around the world trying to impregnate people. And so the fact that she's never had sex is like weird. Um,
Also, but we do get in her head, like in her introspection, we do get the understanding that, like, okay, she grew up in human world. Humans are all scared of her because vampire. And then in the vampire world, people were like, "Ooh,
they
gross.
hated her
She's
because she grew up with
almost like a
humans.
human."
Yeah.
So, and
There was
she's not,
no
she doesn't trust
opportunity.
any of those people
Yeah,
either. So it's
exactly.
kind of like there wasn't really opportunity. So she's not like saving herself or anything.
Right.
She
She
was
just
just kind of like, okay,
it
well,
never happened and wasn't
neither
going to.
here nor there.
Exactly. So he asks where she learned to fight, and she said that she and her sister took classes together after the first couple assassination attempts when she was a kid.
Yeah.
And
So self-defense class,
he says,
basically.
I need you to behave, Misery. And she's like, may I be excused? And then she goes to leave and turns around to ask him one more thing and sees him kind of like inhaling her scent again and like looking tormented. And she says, I took a bath. Did that not make it better? And he says, the situation hasn't improved for me. And I said, girl, I don't think he means what you think he means.
No, no, not at all. And
um,
then it's funny because when he gets close to her, I think this is the first time that they like like touch, that there's some kind of like
yeah.
glancing
Hmm.
touch between them, and his, yeah, like, as a reader,
Well,
you're like, oh, he's having a reaction, and she doesn't necessarily clock it, but
or if
yeah.
she does, she assumes it's a bad reaction because why else would she like what else would she think?
Mhm.
So for the next week, she's like bored shitless and she has a guard everywhere she goes. And her snooping is like never happening now. She like ruined it that first day, basically. And this older were named Mick is been her one of her like guards, and he comes to tell her that there's a video call from her brother.
He's been really, like, kind to her,
Yeah.
where other people are, like, varying degrees of, like, skeptical to, like, "We don't
Rude,
like you, we're kind
angry.
here."
Yeah.
Um, but this guy's been really, like, kind of a nice, kind of like a, he seemed like a grandpa, kind of,
Right.
and she says something about how his heartbeat has, like, some kinda slow, there's something about it that feels
Mhm.
like
This seems sad.
something's wrong or he's
Yeah.
sad or something, yeah.
And so she goes to talk to her brother and she has kind of a coded conversation with him, asking if there's any news on Serena. And did the where that's there with him mention anything about loyals, which is one of the things that they discussed with the whole Max situation. And later on in her room, she's like doing some coding and Anna shows back up and she climbed on the like over the roof into Misery's window. That's how she got in this time because they took away her
But they
key.
took away her key, so yeah,
And
so this girl just pops up, and it's just the second time that she's just like, "Hello,"
and she calls her
and
Miracy, which is so cute. Um, And Anna has apparently absconded with Serena's cat and named it Sparkles. And she's like, oh my God, what am I going to do when Serena comes back? Like, this is terrible.
Well, and she's like, she calls it my cat. Like, she's like, it's
Yeah.
my cat. And she was like, your
My
cat,
cat's
that's
waiting
my
for me.
cat. And she's just like, well, you didn't even like, when it's like you
He
didn't have a
sleeps with
name
me.
for her.
Yeah.
She doesn't like sleeping with you. She was like, maybe it's not your
Yeah.
cat. And I'm like, oh, this
It was
is like a
funny.
child.
Yeah, for sure. And so Anna mentions that Lowe isn't home, and so when she leaves back over the roof, Misery goes snooping in his room, which is adjoined to hers. There's like an adjoining door.
Hmm.
All she really finds is a sketchbook that's locked in a drawer, and she finds a lot of like architectural type drawings because he was an architect before he became the alpha. And she finds a portrait of herself, and it's like amazing, and she is like, "What? Why is this making me feel away?"
Yeah. His other, like his architectural drawings and his like his his other sketches
Mhm.
were also like the way she describes it. It sounds like they were beautiful.
Yeah,
Um,
like he's clearly
so
talented.
yeah.
And so the next afternoon, the Wares are having a barbecue. She kind of watches them through her window. Um, she's always noticing Lowe because he's just like that, got this presence, like you would imagine an alpha to have
Yeah.
in a pack. But then she notices out of the corner of
Mhm.
her eye that Anna is talking to Max, the guy who attacked her the other week. And she's like a little bit concerned, but she's like, it's none of my business. Like,
Well,
why are
she's
you
like,
talking
they're at a
about this?
picnic. Like, this isn't truly like weird behavior. I just don't like, maybe I just don't
Right.
like this guy.
Right. I just don't trust this guy because he tried to kill me, which is obvious.
Sure.
But then Max sort of starts pulling Anna like towards the woods. And
Yeah,
she's
he was like pointing in there and and she seemed like she wasn't. She was like, no, but then he
yeah.
starts like, no, we're going, anyway.
And
What
nobody
she
else
sees.
seems to be noticing this that's down there. And she's like, oh shit, now I have to go deal with this. And it's still afternoon, so it's like not great for her to be outside. She runs outside, it's too bright.
Well, and
She's
she runs
barefoot.
like she actually, because like kind of is it drags her into the woods and
Yeah.
she is like, "Oh no, I'm gonna have to go." So it's like it's not like she's strolling out. She like runs out. She's still in her
Yes.
pajamas. She has no shoes on.
Yep.
She's like running towards
Yeah.
the woods, and people. It's like they see her, but they're not really paying
Didn't really
attention to
think
her.
anything.
So she's, it's like she's got pine needles in her foot, and she's
Yeah, it's not a great situation. And so by the time she finds them in the woods, she's kind of a mess. Like she's burned like from the sun, her feet are hurt.
her feet are messed up.
Um and so she like calls Anna to her, but then Max like picks her up like he's going to take her anyway. And Misery is about to attack when a bunch of wares like jump out of the trees.
Yeah. And
Turns
she's
out
like about to attack, but also she's like falling over because
right, cuz
she's
she's like
burned
yeah, she's rough.
inward.
So then the next scene we see is Misery like picking stuff out of her feet, and Max is restrained sitting on the next couch over, and they're waiting for Lowe. And when he comes in, turns out there was a plan afoot, but Misery butting in kind of messed it up. They were kind of watching Max take her because they wanted to see who he was going to try to hand her off to. And I guess they knew he didn't have a car or anything, so she was never in like a lot of danger, but like of course Misery didn't know that. Um and so Max doesn't want to talk, and Misery's like, wait, I can help. And so she thralls him, which leaves him open to like answering whatever questions people want to ask him. And everyone is freaked out that she can do this. Like they all thought it was a myth. And she's like, I'm actually not even that good at it. Like I have to touch him. Like some people, she's like, I'm not even gonna tell him some people can
Just
like
like
just do
my
it from
dad
the
could
room.
do it without you even noticing that he did it to you,
Yeah.
which
Um,
all of a sudden makes you think about the fact that the human the new
governor.
human governor won't meet with her dad. And I was like, as soon as I read that, I was kind of like, oh, because she's smart.
There's a reason because she's smart. Yeah. So then Mick takes her back to her room and she uses this alone time to break into Lowe's office finally, while they're all distracted. She busts into their systems and she sets a search for Serena and like the name of her newspaper and a couple other things. And then a gray wolf like confronts her. And then Lowe
She
is at
thinks
the
it's a
door.
cat at first, which is like I
Like,
thought
get away
this
from
was
me.
so well done because she's like Sparkles Sylvester, whatever your name
Yeah.
is. And it's like then she looks down and she's like, oh,
It's a gray wolf. And then she looks up and Lowe is standing at the door and he says, what the fuck are you doing, wife? And And he starts threatening her, thinking that she's like spying for the vampires, etc. So she has to tell him about Serena and about finding his name. But then Anna
It's
runs
kind of
in.
cute too because the wolf that was nudging her is like their computer person, and she's like, "Oh, did you set up these firewalls? Because they're real good." And they kind of um,
Yeah,
it's
it's
funny. They
funny.
have like a bonding moment, even though
Um, and so Anna runs in after running away from Juno, who screams out, Liliana Esther Moreland, come back here right now, Ellie Moreland. And so she's like, oh no, like it's not Lowe. Like Lowe's not the name that I was actually looking for. So he's like, we need to talk. So they
Mhm.
go to the kitchen and he tells her about Anna. She's half were and half human.
Yeah,
Misery is mind blown because nobody thought that was even
that's not supposed
possible.
to happen. Yeah,
And he says he's like, I'm really deciding to trust you here. Like, don't fuck me. This is, like we need to be honest here with each other because this info is very dangerous, especially to the little girl.
yeah,
Um,
and it's
and
interesting because like the reasons why, like the reasons she tells him, she is very much like, well, I need to tell him because
right.
uh,
Otherwise,
destruction
they're
of
going to
my
kill me.
person, and also this whole like treaty situation doesn't work if
Right.
the Wares think that the vampires have sent a spy and as the wife. But he is telling her because he's like, you obviously care
Right.
about Anna, and she's like, I mean, no,
She's
but you,
mad that she does, but she clearly does. She hurt herself going after there to help her. So,
yeah. So he's
so
telling
they're,
her because
yeah,
for reasons that are like trust, and she is just, she doesn't know how to feel about that. She's very
yeah,
much trying to be like, I am selfish.
yeah.
I am
I'm
not
only doing this for
caring.
Serena, and I would turn my back on you, for Serena or whatever. And he's like, okay. And so he's thinking that this whole thing had to be why Serena was looking into Anna, but how did she know to
Yeah.
begin with?
And he's also like concerned, like they've gone to great lengths to make sure that nobody really knows her paternity. And so if somebody's looking into it, then that means like, oh, does that mean people know? And
Right?
who knows?
Somebody
And
else
how did
knows
she
and
find
told her.
out?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so she's like, why have I been guarded this whole time if you knew I was telling the truth about this whole thing with Max? And he's like, they were there to protect you. And she's like, oh,
Like it's funny because it's, I think it's just like that's never happened before. So it didn't even like occur to her that
no, not at
maybe.
all. So they talk about exchanging info, and Alex is going to help her and monitor their systems and help her look for anything about Serena. And all this time, he's kind of making himself a sandwich as they're talking, and she steals a finger swipe of peanut butter out of the jar, and he's
It is
shocked,
funny because we're
and
in
she's
her point
embarrassed.
of view, so it's like she keeps noticing the peanut
Yeah, she's
butter,
like,
and
"Oh my
she
god,
is
it smells
kind
so
of
good."
like, "Oh my goodness." And she says something about like, is it the kind with the lumps in it, or is it the smooth
Right?
kind? And she's like, "Oh no, it's smooth."
It's
And
great.
I the whole time I'm kind of like, is does she
Yeah.
hate peanut butter? Like,
No,
is she allergic? What's going
great.
on? But no, that's not
And
it
so
at all.
he's shocked and she's mortified. And she's like, Serena made me try it once and I fell in love with it. Like, I'm so sorry. This is so embarrassing.
She
And he's
was
like,
like,
"What?"
Serena made me do it, and he is like, and she's like, not this time, the
Yeah.
first time.
And
It's
Misery is
very
still,
cute because he like so vampires don't eat,
yep,
they
only
don't
one.
eat food.
Yep.
Also, he's like, so you can eat things that you're not like, even though you're not like
Not
getting
required.
nutrition from it, you can eat it. Like you could eat and she was like, she is horrified and doesn't want, and she's like, please don't tell my father that
Yep.
I eat peanut butter. But also it's like a weird, I don't know if it's like wasteful
It's
or
like a
what, but
weird
for
thing.
them,
Yeah.
where they're like, you can't, she's like just eating something for pleasure or
Right.
like, and so he is like, I eat stuff
For
for
pleasure all the time.
non-nutritive reasons all the time. And so it's interesting to
It is
see
cute
them.
little like bonding moment between them.
Hmm.
And of course she's still pretty messed up from her little trip outside, so he sends her off to bed, and that is the end of the section. But yeah, it's really fun so far. Everything just keeps on happening and you're learning more and more as you go. Of course, everything's only from Misery's point of view. There are little blurbs at the front of each chapter, which are clearly from like Lowe's POV,
Hmm.
which are really interesting and like kind of let the reader in on things that of course Misery doesn't know.
Yeah.
So Yeah,
They're very short though, and
very short.
it's
Couple
really a
minutes.
tease. I wish
Yeah,
I kind of want to have a little side book that gives
I
me
know.
insight.
Me too. Oh my gosh. All right. Well, next week we'll be back with the next section, and we'll see you then.
See you then.